Hi guys, welcome to Pixel Affair. It's Kobe here, and in today's video we are going to talk about basic Espresso every Cinema 4D user must know. It doesn't matter how new you are in Cinema 4D or how experienced you are, it's something you should know and it will actually be very helpful. So Espresso for beginners in Cinema 4D can actually be a bit intimidating, but using it to create basic functions is very simple and easy, and it can actually save you a lot of time. I'm sure if you've used Cinema 4D for some time, this is something you know about. So let's actually get into Cinema 4D and see how this whole thing I'm talking about works. So I'm in Cinema 4D and I'm using Cinema 4D R26, but this will work in every Cinema 4D version that you might have. So I'll go ahead and create a text object. And if you are somebody who hates to always come in here to change, for instance, if I type in pixel, right? See, the text is pixel, but it's still written text here. If you are somebody who always want to organize your scene, but hate to come in and change the text twice, what you can simply do is simply come into the basic tab. You can see the name. You can right click on the name, and you can see we have expressions. So you could go on expression, set driver, and now you come down to your object tab. Right click on the text spline, this particular one, and on expressions again, say set driven absolutely, and I can see it's gone back to the text. So what it means is that from here going all the time, this particular text is what will control what's written here, right? So if I come in here now, type in pixel, can see now it changes to the text, and in your object manager I can see your text has also changed. So I can double click on it here and I'll type in like affair. All right, and you can see it has simply changed to affair. Everything, the text in the scene is affair, and the one in our object manager is affair, and this can actually go a long way to help you in a lot of instances. But what has happened is that you can see there's an Espresso tag which has been applied to our text, and by doing just set driver and set driven, you've actually created your first Espresso. All right, we will go actually into the Espresso later, but this is not all that you can do, and this is actually a tip of the iceberg of what you can do with this, right? So for instance, I'll actually delete this. So for example, I have this wheel that anytime I move it on the X, I want it to rotate as well. So ideally, if we were to use keyframes, I probably have to set a keyframe for this, and now also in the rotation I have to set keyframe. But we can simply use the set driven and the set driver and the set driven to do the same thing. So I can simply right click on its expressions, set driver, and I come to the rotation, the banking which we want to control, right click on it and say set driven expression, set driven absolutely. And now if I move it, you can see where my X, anytime my X is controls the rotation of our wheel as well, right? And that's very also useful. So this, in this scenario, for instance, when you are controlling something like cars or bikes, anything that has wheel, you don't necessarily have to keyframe two different parameters. You can use one to control it. Very, very important. Also, the set driver and the set driven don't necessarily have to be within one object. So let me actually create a new scene, and I'll create like a cube, and I'll move it on the side, and I'll create like a sphere, right? And I'll move it on the side as well. And now I want, anytime I move the X of the sphere, I want the cube to go up, right? Anytime I move it in this direction, I want the cube to go up. So let's simple come into the sphere. So the X is what I want to use to X position of the sphere is what I want to use to drive the Y position of the cube, right? So let's right click on the expression, set driver, and I'll come into I'll select the cube, come to its positions as well on the Y, right click, and I'll say expression set driven absolutely, and you can see now it's actually moved our cube upwards. And if you check the parameter, let me actually select the sphere and type in, let's see, 300. You can see 300 in this X. If I come into the cube, you can see the same thing which is in the Y, right? So now if I select the sphere and move it, you can see the cube is also moving, but it's not moving upwards the way I want it, right? So this is where we actually go into our Espresso tag, and you can see Espresso has been added to our cube, right? So if I double click on it, it opens our Espresso Editor, and now you can see what's happening. What's happening is that the sphere, right? This is the sphere, which is object, and the cube, which in here. We can simply, this basic Espresso, if we didn't use the set driven, we could simply drag and drop it in here, the cube and the sphere, or we can drag and drop it in as objects, but it did it automatically for us. So let's select all of this and just hit delete to delete them. Now, so what's happening is that the sphere is actually being input into the, so this is actually output. The red side is output and the blue side is input. But in this case, we can actually do it direct, straight from the sphere to the cube, because they are all using the same parameters and it will still work, right? But the range mapper helps us to actually convert it and control it in certain ways. So like I was saying, anytime I move the sphere in this direction, I want the cube to go up, not downwards, right? So it's doing the reverse. So we can simply select the range mapper, and you can see there are some attributes that we can control, and in there we have reverse in there. So I can simply check reverse, and now if I move my sphere, you can see now the sphere, the cube is going up, right? So that's what the range advantage the range mapper gives us by connecting it. But it does a lot. The range mapper actually does a lot, which we can talk about, right? So now it's giving us a whole lot of control, and since we are in here, we can use the sphere to control a lot of other parameters. So for instance, I don't want to control only the position of the cube. I want to control the size of the cube as well. So I can simply come in, select the cube, right? You can actually go into the input, any variable or any property you want to control, you can find it here. But if this is a bit cumbersome for you, you can simply say, I want to control the size Z of our cube. So all we have to do is to select it, click and drag it, and drop it into our input, right? And you can see now it's added it. And now we can go ahead and use the same nut to connect it to it. And now you can see it's happening in our viewport. So now when I move the X, see, it moves it up, and at the same time it scales the Z, right? It moves it up and scales the Z, right? So we can use it to connect to multiple objects, either by simply dragging and dropping it in here. So we can actually create a different object. Let's see, let me create a cylinder, right? And I want to control maybe the Z position. You can simply drag and drop the cylinder in here, and you can use this to control the cylinders. Let's say the Y position of the cylinder. So I can come to the cylinder. We can actually all of this find it in here, but sometimes because it's a beginner thing, it might be cumbersome for you. So you don't have to worry going through. You can simply select the object, whatever you want to control, drag and drop it in the input, the Y position, right? And now let's click and drag to it. And now if I move the sphere once again, you can see the Y position of the cylinder too is being controlled. So this is really, really powerful. You can use one parameter to control a lot of things, and you can let it do several things, especially through the range mapper. And we'll actually talk about it. And there are a lot of things that you can use to do the set driven and set driver. So let me show you another example. So for instance, let me create a scene here. I'll probably create a text, and I'll type something like on, right? And I'll type another one. I'll say off, right? So we have let me move the off upwards, right? So now we have on and off. So what I want is that anytime I click on this, I click on the on, so this is the on and this is the off. So anytime anytime one is on, one should be off, basically. So I don't want to be doing on and off control, but I want one to control another. So let's use the on. So I'll select the on, and I'll come to the basic, and you see the enable tab. This is where we control it. So I'll right click on this, and I'll say expression set driver. You can see, and you can now go to the off, right click, set driven, absolutely. And you can see now everything is off. It's all being controlled by the on. So if I click it on, but I want it the other way around. So like we did, double click on it, and now we come into the Espresso, and you can see in this time it's connecting directly, no range mapper. So there are a lot of nodes that you can use, but in this case you want our range mapper. So we can simply we can either right click and come into our Espresso, calculate, and in there we'll find, I think, range mapper in here, or we can simply hold type Shift C and search for range mapper as well. That one too can work. Range mapper. I think it's not working, but you can actually look for it in here as well, I think. But then it's fine. You can be found in the Espresso new tag calculate, and you can find our range mapper in here. So now we have our range mapper, and like just we did, we connect this one to the input, the on to the input here, and now connect this one to the output, and everything is still the same, right? But remember the reverse thing that we talked about. So all I can do is in the range mapper, I'll just check reverse, and now whenever on is like the on is off, the off is on. Like, that's funny, right? So if I click on this, you can see now the on is on and the off is off, right? And the same thing. So we can use it to do a lot of things. This is not, there are a lot of things you can do with the set driven and set driver key and the range mapper. So let me show another example. So I have a new scene here. I'll go ahead and create something like a cube, right? Let me actually zoom out a little bit, and then I'll hit Control D to come to the project settings, and you can see if I actually move on my timeline, you can see the project setting, the project time is changing, right, over time. So we are going to use that to control the movement of our cube, right? So I'll right click on the project time, and I'll say set driver, and I'll come to the cube, and I want it to move on the Z position. So I'll right click on the Z position, and I'll say set driven, absolutely as usual. And now if I hit play, it's actually moving, but we can't see. And the reason why we can't see what's going on is if I double click on the Espresso and you open the Espresso Editor, you can see that our project time is connected directly into our position, right? And what's happening is that the project time, it's not actually being read in frames. So if I go to Control D, and you can see the project time 30 frames, it's a second. It's actually being read in seconds, not actually in frames. So 30 frames is 1 second, because the project setting is 30 frames per second. So at 1 second, it moves our cube 1 centimeter. So you can see now you're on 30 frames, and if you select our cube and come to our cube coordinate, it moves it on just 1 centimeter. So if you go to 60 frames, which is 2 seconds, it moves it 2 centimeter. But we want to actually multiply it. I want it to move at 1 frame, it moves like 100 centimeters and everything. And same way, that's where the range mapper comes in. So I'll come into we can actually use this way and search through Espresso calculator and find it, or we can simply search it here. So type in range mapper, and you can see it comes, and now we drag in our range mapper. We will connect the project time into the input, and then output into our cubes input, right? And now nothing has changed, everything is still the same. But now what the range mapper actually gives us is that you can see, if you come to the attribute, we have parameter. So it says input, which is the project time, 0 seconds, it's 0 centimeters, which is the cube's position, 0 centimeters. So when it's 0 seconds, it should be 0 centimeters. And when it's 1 second, it should be 1 centimeter, right? But we want it to be 100 centimeter. So we will change it from when it's 1 second, which is the input upper, to 100 centimeters, which is the output upper. So now let's put in 100 in here. So when it's 0 seconds, it's 0 centimeters, and then it's 1 second, it's 100 centimeters. And now you can see our cube has moved 100 centimeters. If you go into our objects manager, you can see our cube have moved 100 centimeters. And now if I go back and hit play, you can see now our cube is moving. So how fast we want our cube to go, we can use the range mapper. So if you want it to move even more than 100 centimeters, we can type in here. So this is very, very powerful. There are other things that we can talk about the range mapper. It's really deeper than this. And if it's something, when you are interested, if you think you're interested, you can actually comment in the comment section, and I'll probably talk a little bit about the range mapper and a little bit about the basics of Espresso for like a beginner. There are a lot of things in this Espresso which you can never exhaust learning about. So, and there's a lot. Myself, I'm not expecting Espresso, but these are basics I sort of understand. So if you actually come into the node tab, there are other things in here like the reverse, which I've actually talked about, and there's modulo. So the modulo, let me actually check it, and if I hit play, you can see anytime it goes, it catches the 30 seconds. Now it comes back and starts again, right? And that's the modulo and everything. And there's use spline, so we can actually use spline to control. So let me actually come into the parameter, and you can see we have this spline field here. So if you hold control and click, you can see we create a point, right? And now hold control to create the second point, and now we can use this spline to control the movement, how the thing interpolates through time, right? So now let me actually add a third point here. I'll move this one somewhere here, and I'll set it like this, and actually move this one down. So what you are doing is that we want it to be going back and forth like that. So let me actually do something like this. And now with this spline, so what's happening is that it goes and you see it's coming back. So what's happening is that instead of the whole thing at frame 1 second, which is 30 frames, our cube should be 100 centimeters. It actually makes it go quicker at frame 15, which is in the middle of the thing. It goes like the 100, right? Almost the 100, and then it starts reversing it back to 0 again, right? So that's what it literally does. But because it's set to the modulo, if I select the range mapper, the range mapper brings it back to 0. So now it starts again, right? So if we hit play, let's see what we have. You can see now it looks like it's sort of going back and forth, bouncing back and forth. So there's a lot of things that you can actually use the range mapper with the Espresso to do, and this is like quite basic. There's tons and tons and tons and tons of things we can do using Espresso, and it's unlimited. It's your limit. The limit is your imagination, basically, right? But this is just basic, and if you are using Cinema 4D, at least you should know how to do just right click, set driven, and set driven absolutely your relative. Let me actually talk a little bit about the set driven relative, right? So let me go ahead and put this one back and delete it. So I'll move the cube somewhere here, and I'll create like a sphere once again, and now I'll move the sphere somewhere here, right? Let me move it upwards. So for instance, let's say if I want to use the Y of the sphere to control the Y of the cube, if I see right click, expression set driver, right? And I come to the cube and say right click, expression set driver, and set absolutely. Can see now the cube jumps to the same position because it's controlling it absolutely. So the cube's the sphere's numbers will be exactly as the same as the cube's numbers. So let me actually make this one maybe 100, and if you select the cube, you can see its numbers too will be 100, right? So that's what basically the set absolute. So it absolutely controls everything, right? Let me delete the tag, and everything will be deleted. And now let me actually change it again, and now leave this like that. Right. So now if I come into the sphere position again, Y position, right click, set driver, and I come to the cube, right click, it says set driven relatively, right? You can see now the cube stays at its position, but it's still driven by the sphere. Now if I move the sphere, it's moving the cube and everything, but it's not like absolute, like it stayed at its position and still being moved by the sphere. So that's the difference with the relative and the absolutely, right? So the absolute takes control charge, and the relative sort of keeps the thing at its initial position and then continues from there. So that's the difference between the set driven relatively and set driven absolutely. I hope this was useful, and if it's this is something you want me to do a little bit in depth about the intro or basics of Espresso, actually add it in the comments, and I'll actually be glad to talk about or do something about it. I hope this was useful and you learned something from it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.